Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
I didn't see them when I walked across the stage. That's how I knew something was wrong. I scanned the crowd the way you do when you're trying to pretend you're not scanning the crowd. Like I was just soaking in the moment, not looking for familiar faces. But I was. I absolutely was. And when I stepped off that stage with my diploma in hand, 2 decades older than the average graduate, with my heart pounding out of my chest, there was this ache that bloomed in my gut because I already knew they hadn't come. I had done the damn thing, law school, at 43. After 2 marriages, 1 kid, 3 career changes, and more nights crying into takeout than I'd admit in polite company. I had done it. I worked 2 jobs, studied on lunch breaks, fell asleep with my face in textbooks. I skipped holidays, said no to friends. My body aged faster than I expected it to. My hair started graying at the temples, my back screamed by the end of every week. And for what? This moment. This one ceremony where I was supposed to feel like everything was worth it. But I looked up at the seats, Section C, Row 5, where I told my family to sit. Empty, not just one seat, all of them. My mom, who used to say she wanted to be a paralegal once. My dad, who bragged about me until I switched majors in my 20s. My older sister, Melanie, who used to help me study when we were kids, but hadn't answered a phone call in 4 months. And my son, Thomas, 19 and full of opinions lately, who told me once, "No offense, Mom, but you getting a degree at your age isn't really a big deal." None of them came. The weird thing is, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, not at first. It was like my emotions got bottlenecked behind this huge blank wall of disbelief. I just stood there, frozen in heels that were already killing me, smiling through my teeth, while everyone around me hugged family and friends. I tried not to look too obvious, but let me tell you something. When you're the only one standing alone in a graduation gown, people notice. And then it happened. They called the next speaker up to the podium, and I realized something. The live broadcast camera, yeah, the one they had up for the university's streaming service, was just sitting there in front of me, idle, still recording. Maybe it was for B-roll, maybe they were planning to cut away. But in that second, something inside me snapped. Or maybe woke up. I walked over, calm, too calm, like the kind of calm that comes after a hurricane has wrecked your whole house and you've got nothing left to lose. And I looked straight into the lens. It wasn't part of the plan, nothing was, but I said it anyway. To the people who weren't proud, don't text me now. I said it slow, like I wanted every syllable to land and settle and sting a little. And then I walked off. Didn't wait for applause. Didn't explain a thing. Because sometimes, silence says it better. By the time I got home, still in my gown, still holding the diploma like it was a damn newborn, I had 9 missed calls, 2 from my mom, 1 from my dad, 4 from Melanie, and 2 from my son. No voicemails, just that eerie silence people leave when they don't know what to say, or when they know they should have said it way earlier. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. You know what the messed up part is? Some little corner of me still hoped one of them had a good reason. Car trouble, wrong auditorium, bad directions, hell, even a medical emergency. But none of them had sent a text, not even a "sorry, can't make it," not even a lazy thumbs up emoji. And I know what you're thinking. Maybe there was a reason, maybe I should have waited to hear them out. But here's the thing, when you spend your whole life bending backward to be enough, and the one day you finally feel like you are, no one shows up. That's not just disappointing, that's clarity. That's the kind of moment you never forget. Because it burns itself onto your bones. What kind of person doesn't show up when you finally do something that could have made them proud? Maybe you've had a moment like that, where someone's absence hit harder than any insult ever could. If you have, you'll understand why I said it. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. The internet got hold of the video by the next morning. Someone's cousin posted it on TikTok. And it started spreading like a spark in dry grass. People were tagging their own families, their friends, writing things like, "This hit hard," or "She said what I've been thinking for years." Meanwhile, my mom texted, finally, just one line. Was that about us? I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned my phone off and poured a glass of wine. Because I already knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a long-ass reckoning. And I wasn't sure yet if I was ready to pick up the phone or burn the whole thing down. The thing they never tell you when you start over in your 40s is how lonely it gets. How the people you think will cheer you on are often the ones watching silently from the sidelines, arms crossed, waiting for you to trip. When I first walked into that law school classroom at 40, older than most of the professors, sitting next to students who still called their parents mommy and daddy on speakerphone, I told myself I was doing it for me. But that wasn't the whole truth. I was doing it for the younger version of myself who once wanted to become a lawyer before life got messy, before Thomas was born, before my ex-husband Eric made me feel like chasing a dream after 30 was foolish and selfish. I was doing it for the version of me who believed I was meant for something bigger than answering phones and managing other people's calendars. But the truth is, deep down, I thought finishing law school would fix things. I thought maybe it would earn back some kind of respect from my family, like a delayed redemption arc. I figured that if I just pushed through, if I kept my head down and racked up the credits, they'd eventually take notice. I thought Melanie would be the first to post a proud sister selfie with me in my cap and gown, bragging about how her little sister didn't give up. I thought my mom would cry like she used to when I was in school plays, covering her mouth like my success surprised her in the best way. And I thought maybe, just maybe, Thomas would finally look at me and see someone he could admire, not just the tired woman who burned toast and borrowed money for books. Instead, I got silence. That silence wasn't new, though. It had started creeping in months before the ceremony. Melanie and I had stopped talking sometime around Thanksgiving, after a particularly nasty argument about my decision to skip the family trip to Cabo. She had said I was being selfish and dramatic, that no one cares about midlife crises in courtrooms. My mom, who usually played mediator, had simply shrugged and told me I needed to let things go. She said, "Not everything is personal, Rachel," in that distant tone that made it sound like I was being overly sensitive instead of rightfully hurt. And then there was Thomas. He had started pulling away the moment I told him I couldn't help pay for his second semester because tuition had drained every account I had. He was polite about it, cold in that way that stings worse than yelling. "It's fine," he said, but his eyes had already shut me out. Since then, we'd been orbiting each other like two planets on opposite sides of the sun. Technically related, but out of sync, unreachable. So when graduation came, a part of me knew, or at least suspected, that they wouldn't show. But that didn't stop me from saving them seats. It didn't stop me from ironing my robe 3 times or getting my hair blown out that morning. It didn't stop me from texting the group chat. "Ceremony starts at 2, Section C, Row 5. Hope you can make it." No one replied. Still, I held out hope until the very last second, right up until the moment I walked that stage. That's when the absence became impossible to deny. And when I looked into that camera and said what I said, it wasn't just bitterness talking. It was years of swallowing disappointment, years of trying to be the bigger person while everyone else kept shrinking their support. It was a line in the sand I had drawn without even knowing it. After the clip went viral, people started reaching out. Strangers, women in their 50s, single moms, retired teachers, men who said their daughters had been through the same thing. People I didn't know started rooting for me louder than anyone who shared my DNA ever had. One woman wrote, "My mother skipped my nursing school graduation because her boyfriend had a barbecue. You made me feel seen." Another man, who looked to be around my dad's age, emailed me to say, "Your words reminded me of my own daughter. I reached out to her after 2 years. Thank you." And that's when it hit me. Maybe the people who should have been proud weren't the ones who could be. Maybe they had never been capable of seeing me fully, of accepting that my success didn't need to be convenient or comfortable for them to matter. And maybe that wasn't about me at all. Maybe it never was. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Melanie's last message, sent weeks before the ceremony, right after that Cabo fight. She had written, "You think getting a degree will fix your life? You've always needed an audience. Some of us grow up. That message kept playing in my head on a loop, even louder than the applause I never heard from Section C. And in a way, she was right. I did need an audience. I needed someone, anyone, to witness what it cost me to become this version of myself. I wanted someone to see how many nights I stayed up until 3, how many meals I skipped to pay for books, how many times I failed and started again. I didn't want pity. I wanted acknowledgement. What do you think? Would you still chase your dream if your whole family thought it was pathetic? Be honest. Drop a yes or no in the comments. I really want to know. That night, as I sat in my apartment, still in my gown, eating Chinese food alone with my degree on the table like it was company, I stared at the blinking cursor in my message thread with Thomas. I didn't write anything. I didn't know how to ask him why he didn't come. I didn't know how to say, I needed you there, without it sounding like guilt or blame. So I just sat there, quiet, and let the silence echo back. And then, just past midnight, Melanie posted something on Facebook. It was a photo of her at some rooftop party, holding a glass of wine, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. The caption read, "Some people chase degrees to hide who they really are, not me." She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. There's a special kind of fury that builds when someone who's known your lowest moments tries to publicly redefine you with a sentence, especially when that sentence is coded in smugness and performs for people who've only ever seen your life through filtered snapshots. Melanie's post wasn't just careless, it was surgical, precise. The way she chose those words, "Some people chase degrees to hide who they really are," felt like the emotional equivalent of a knife slid under a rib cage with a smile. She could have said anything. She could have called me out directly, could have sent me a scathing private message if she was so damn convinced I was a fraud. But instead, she went the route of passive-aggressive artistry, where the point isn't just to hurt. It's to make the crowd nod along while pretending it's not an attack. I stared at her post for a long time that night, blinking, rereading, then blinking again. I kept hoping my eyes were wrong, that maybe I'd misread it or let my exhaustion distort the words. But it was there, in black and white, sandwiched between filtered shots of cheese boards and generic party guests. That casual cruelty sitting like a grenade in the middle of her evening updates. The comments were worse. Old friends, mutual cousins, people I hadn't seen in years chimed in with laughing emojis and little replies like, "OMG, so true," or "You always know how to say it, girl." Not one person asked who she was talking about because they already knew. When someone whose family turns the internet into a weapon, there's nowhere to hide. There's no private hurt. Everything spills into the public square, and you can either stay quiet and swallow the poison or respond and risk looking bitter, unhinged, like the unstable mess they're implying you are. That's the trap, and I knew it well. I sat on my hands for a solid hour, fighting every part of me that wanted to light her up in the comments, to list every sacrifice I made while she coasted through life on other people's patience and second chances. But I didn't do it. I didn't say a word. I didn't comment or message her. I closed the app and sat in the dark with my laptop screen glowing against the far wall, thinking about the last time Melanie and I had been close. I couldn't even pin it to a specific year. Maybe back when Thomas was born, and she actually showed up with groceries and diapers, and made me laugh even when I felt like I was crumbling. Or maybe even earlier than that, when we were still kids sharing a bedroom and making up songs to fall asleep. Somewhere along the way, she had started measuring me by a scale I never understood. If I struggled, I was dramatic. If I succeeded, I was showing off. There was no middle ground with her, only scrutiny. The next day, my inbox looked like someone had lobbed a digital grenade into it. Messages poured in, not just from friends or acquaintances, but from strangers who'd seen the graduation clip and were now seeing Melanie's post too, because someone had put 2 and 2 together and started sharing them side by side. People were choosing sides. I had somehow become the main character in a family drama none of them had watched from the beginning, but everyone had strong opinions about. Some messages said things like, "You go, girl. Don't let toxic family hold you back." Others were less kind, questioning whether I'd exaggerated my family's absence for attention, asking why my own son hadn't shown up if I was such a wonderful mother. It stung, not because it was true, but because it wasn't, and because deep down, a part of me still wondered if maybe I had asked for this. Not the absence, not the betrayal, but the spotlight. I had walked into that camera frame after all. I had said those words with full intent. "Don't text me now." I hadn't whispered it. I had declared it. And declarations demand consequences. Around noon, I finally got a call from my mom. Not a text this time, a real call. It rang 3 times before I picked up. Stomach knotted, heart in my throat. Her voice was soft, a little strained, like she'd been rehearsing. She didn't ask how graduation went. She didn't congratulate me. She said, "Your sister's upset. She says you're dragging the family through the mud for your 15 minutes of fame." That was her opener. No hello, no warmth, just that. I think I laughed. This dry, broken sound that surprised even me. I said, "She made the post, Mom." She made the post. I didn't even mention her name. She did that all by herself. There was silence on the other end. Then she sighed. And in that sigh was everything I already knew. Her tired allegiance to keeping the peace, her lifelong discomfort with confrontation, and that old habit of blaming whoever made the most noise rather than whoever threw the first punch. "She didn't mean it like that," she said finally. "You know how Melanie is, she was just venting." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake the phone and shout, "Why is it always my job to understand her but never the other way around?" But I didn't. I'd screamed before. I'd fought and cried and begged and tried. I was done. Instead, I said, "If this is what support looks like in our family, then maybe I'm better off without it." And then I hung up. No goodbye, just an end. That night, I opened the photo album on my phone and looked through the graduation pictures a friend had taken for me. I was smiling in them, smiling big. Not fake, not forced. For a moment, I remembered how proud I had felt when I walked across that stage, how real that pride had been, before silence, before Facebook posts, before old wounds cracked open again, and I held on to that feeling because it was mine. It wasn't borrowed pride, wasn't conditional or performative. It belonged to me and me alone. The next morning, a new message showed up. It was from Thomas. It said, "Hey, Mom, can we talk?" I stared at that message for a long time, wondering what kind of conversation it would turn into, and whether I was ready to have it. I didn't reply to Thomas right away. The message sat in my inbox like a ticking clock, one of those things you read and reread 100 times while pretending you're still deciding what to say, when in reality, you're already drowning in the wave of emotions it pulls behind it. "Hey, Mom, can we talk?" That was it. No punctuation, no context, just that. And yet it managed to drag up every memory I had buried in the corners of motherhood, the scraped knees I kissed, the arguments about homework, the nights I stayed up folding laundry after 12-hour shifts while he slept soundly in the next room. You don't get to live through all of that and feel nothing when your son finally reaches out after radio silence. I wanted to believe it was going to be a real conversation, not just a courtesy text, not just him checking in to ease some guilt. I wanted it to mean something, but I'd learned the hard way not to expect too much. Hope was a tricky thing when it came to family. It made you bend too far, reach too hard, hold on too long to the idea of who people used to be, rather than facing who they'd become. I told myself I'd wait until I had a clear head, until the sting of Melanie's post faded, until my mother's phone calls stopped echoing in my chest, bent us like a warning bell. But the truth is, I was just afraid of what he'd say. More afraid of the words that might come out of his mouth than the ones that already hadn't. 2 days later, he showed up at my door. No warning, no follow-up message, no, "Hey, I'm on my way," or "Is now a good time?" Just the sound of knuckles tapping against the door frame while I was halfway through microwaving a leftover burrito. I opened the door, still in sweatpants, hair a mess, and there he was, 19 years old, taller than I remembered, hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. For a second, neither of us said a thing. We just stood in the doorway, suspended in that strange space between familiarity and estrangement. Finally, I stepped aside and just said, "You gonna come in or just stand there and look guilty?" He cracked a small smile, the kind that barely touches the eyes but tries anyway, and walked in. We didn't talk for the first 5 minutes. I offered him water, then sat across from him at the table, arms folded, trying to act casual when nothing about the moment felt casual. He looked around the apartment like he hadn't seen it in years. In some ways, he hadn't. He'd moved in with Eric the year before, after we had a fight about rent and responsibility, and ever since then, our relationship had been on some weird kind of pause, like we were waiting for the other person to blink first. But he was here now, and that had to count for something. He finally cleared his throat and said, "I saw the video." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak yet. He continued, "Everyone's talking about it. Some people at school were even sharing it like it was some kind of inspirational thing. They didn't even know it was you until I told them." That was interesting, not the viral part. I already knew the clip had taken off. But the fact that he told people it was me, that he claimed me, even if just in passing. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't come because I didn't think it mattered to you." That landed like a punch, not because it was true, but because it showed how far apart we'd drifted, how badly we'd misunderstood each other. I had spent so long fighting to prove my worth, not just to the world, but to the people closest to me, that I hadn't noticed when they started tuning me out altogether. I'd been so focused on surviving, on achieving, on getting to the damn finish line, that I didn't stop to make sure he understood why it all mattered. I said, it mattered to me more than anything. But it wasn't just about the degree. It was about having someone there who gave a damn that I made it. He flinched, like that hurt. And maybe it should have. I wasn't in the mood to soften it. Not this time. He said, "I thought you were trying to prove something. To Dad, to Aunt Mel, to everyone who said you'd never do it." I shook my head. I was trying to prove it to myself. He sat back in the chair, exhaling deeply, the way he used to when he was trying to buy himself time before saying something hard. "I guess I didn't know how to show up for you," he said finally. "I thought maybe it'd be easier if I just stayed out of it. I didn't think you needed me." And there it was, the core of it. That same assumption so many people made when you're the strong one, the one who keeps pushing forward no matter who bails out along the way. They think because you keep going, it must mean you're not hurting. They think absence doesn't leave a mark just because you don't cry about it in public. I leaned forward, my voice quieter now. "I always needed you. You're my son, Thomas. I didn't go through all that just to end up alone on the day I finally got to celebrate." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to draw me pictures and leave them on my pillow when he knew I was sad, the one who used to tell me I was his favorite superhero. And I wondered when exactly that little boy grew into a man who didn't know how to call his mother. We didn't solve everything that night. There were no tears, no dramatic hugs, no swelling music behind some big emotional breakthrough, but he stayed for dinner. We ate on the couch. He asked about the job offers that had started trickling in after the video went viral. I told him I hadn't decided yet. He told me he was thinking about changing majors. It was awkward, stilted, real, and that was enough. That night after he left, I sat alone again, but this time it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the start of something different. Maybe not repair, maybe not resolution, but recognition. Because sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood or your last name. Sometimes family is the person who walks back through your door and says, "I didn't show up, but I'm here now." And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to build on. Or at least enough to try. It's strange how your memory holds on to sound. You forget what someone wore. You lose the details of their face over time, but their voice, that lingers. Sometimes it doesn't even wait for permission. it just shows up uninvited. One minute you're doing something as ordinary as folding laundry or rinsing out a mug, and then suddenly it's there again, floating out of the quiet like a ghost, as if the silence got bored and needed to remind you of something you tried to leave in the past. I hadn't played the voicemail in over a year, but I never deleted it either. I told myself it was because I didn't want to forget the tone of his voice, but the truth is, I kept it because it was the last time Eric said something real to me. Real and completely unexpected. I got the message on a Tuesday, back when I was still drowning in finals, and wondering if the second mortgage had been a mistake. The number popped up while I was in the library. I remember staring at it, debating whether I should answer, heart already tightening. Eric never called out of the blue. He texted when he wanted something, usually a favor or a dig disguised as a casual check-in. So when the voicemail icon lit up after I didn't pick up, I didn't listen right away. I waited until I was alone, parked in the lot of some half-dead strip mall between a laundromat and a liquor store, where no one would see my face if it cracked. He sounded tired. That's what struck me first. Eric never sounded tired. He always had this crisp, cutting tone, the kind that made you feel like you were already on trial, even if he was just asking where the remote was. But this time his voice was heavy, almost like he had been rehearsing the words and ran out of conviction halfway through. He said, "Rachel, I know we haven't talked much, and I know you probably don't want to hear anything from me right now, but I heard about school, about law, and I guess I just wanted to say I was wrong. You're doing it, and I was wrong." That was it. No long speech. No apology for the years he spent dismissing my ambition like it was a hobby. No acknowledgement of the nights he walked in, looked at my textbooks, and laughed like I was wasting both our time. Just those few words, muted, clumsy, and late. So painfully late. I didn't tell anyone about the voicemail when I got it. Not Thomas, not Melanie, not even my best friend Kara, who had seen me cry over Eric more times than I wanted to admit. I kept it close like a secret I wasn't sure I was ready to share, because hearing those words after so long didn't feel like closure. It felt like someone giving you the right answer a decade too late, after the exam had been graded and the class dismissed. When I saw Thomas again after the graduation fallout, when we finally started talking like people instead of characters in each other's resentments, that message started creeping back into my mind. I kept wondering if I should let him hear it, if it would matter to him to know that his father had, in some small and fumbled way, tried to admit fault. But I couldn't do it, because part of me still didn't know if I believed it myself. You can say a lot of things in a voicemail. Saying it face to face, when there's weight and consequence, is a whole other story. And anyway, it wasn't like Eric had followed up after that. He hadn't come to the ceremony, he hadn't texted, he hadn't commented on the viral video. It was like his message was meant to check a box to release him from whatever small kernel of guilt he had grown in the back of his conscience. And once he hit send, he was done with it. But I wasn't. Because as much as I tried to act like I didn't need his validation anymore, some part of me had wanted to hear him say those words. Not in a voicemail, not once, not in passing, but consistently, openly, without the fog of pride hanging between us. I had wanted to hear him say, "I was wrong," when we were still married, when I was losing sleep and hope and self-worth, trying to convince him that I wasn't wasting my time, that my dreams had value, even if they didn't make money right away. I had wanted him to look me in the eye when we sat across from each other in that final mediation meeting and admit that I had given everything I had to make things work. Not just in the marriage, but in life. But he didn't. He set it into a machine, in the safety of my absence, and then disappeared again like nothing had happened. I don't know if Thomas had heard the voicemail, or if Eric had ever said anything to him about it. They don't talk much now, not since the split turned into full-on emotional distance. Every once in a while, Thomas mentions his dad like a footnote, like a name in a story he's telling that doesn't matter much to the plot. I think he's angry, but it's a quiet, simmering kind of anger. The kind that doesn't explode, just settles in and hardens, Last week, while we were eating dinner together, he asked me out of nowhere, "Did Dad ever say anything about you going back to school?" I looked at him for a long second, debating whether the truth would help or hurt. Then I said, "He left a message once, said he was wrong." Thomas nodded like that made sense. "That sounds like him, always too little, too late." I almost told him I still had the message. I almost asked if he wanted to hear it, but I didn't. Because the version of Eric that lived in my voicemail didn't exist anymore, not in any real way. And whatever peace I found in hearing those words wasn't going to fix what had broken between them. Sometimes you hold on to things, not because they're useful, but because they remind you that even people who swore they'd never change are capable of a moment of truth, however fleeting. And maybe that's what that message was. A moment. One I kept not because I needed to hear it again, but because I needed to know it had been said, even if it came from the shadows of silence. I still haven't deleted it. I probably never will. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's power. But more often than not, it's just a curtain pulled over something someone doesn't want you to see until it's too late for you to do anything about it. I used to believe that the worst kind of betrayal came from harsh words or loud fights, from people storming out of rooms and slamming doors behind them. But I've come to understand that the real damage happens in the quiet, when people decide to hide the truth not out of mercy, but out of convenience. And what I found out that week, buried beneath a chain of overlooked details and gut feelings I'd ignored for far too long, was that my family had been sitting on a secret that reshaped everything I thought I understood about my past. It started with an offhand comment from Thomas, of all people. We had been cleaning out a closet in my apartment, something mundane, something that should have been uneventful, but it was in the middle of sorting through old photo albums and boxes of junk from the early 2000s that he pulled out a stack of letters bound with a faded rubber band. I hadn't seen them in years. Honestly, I forgot they even existed. Most of them were bills, notes scribbled on yellow pads, a few cards from my college years, and then one envelope that stopped Thomas cold. He stared at it for a second too long, his expression shifting in that subtle way you only notice if you've watched someone grow up in front of you, if you know how to read them like a second language. He handed it to me and said, "Why didn't you ever tell me Grandpa tried to send money for school?" My heart stopped. I took the envelope, confused, unsure of what he meant. I opened it and found a check, dated over 18 years ago, written out in my father's handwriting. It was for $5,000. The memo line said, "For Rachel's tuition, get started." But I never cashed that check. I never even saw it. It had been sealed in that envelope, tucked away in a box I hadn't touched since I moved out of my parents' house after Thomas was born. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just held the check, stared at it like it was a ghost resurrected from a version of my life that could have unfolded entirely differently. $5,000. It wouldn't have paid for everything, but it would have made a difference. It would have meant I didn't have to drop out the first time. It would have meant I didn't have to pick up 2 jobs and still come up short. It would have meant I could have stayed on track, graduated in my 20s, maybe spared myself years of scraping and compromise. The worst part wasn't that I didn't get the money. It was that I didn't even know the offer had been made. That night, I called my mother. I wasn't sure what I wanted to hear from her. Maybe some kind of explanation, maybe an apology. What I got instead was a long pause, followed by a breath so deep and heavy it felt like she'd been holding it in for decades. "Oh," she said, just that, like it was a door she hoped would never be opened. I asked her directly, without anger at first, because I needed answers more than I needed to rage. "Did Dad try to pay for my tuition back then? Did you hide that from me?" She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She said, "He wanted to help, but you were already struggling so much. You'd just had the baby. You were barely keeping it together. I didn't think it would help to dangle something in front of you that you might not even be able to follow through on." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was drowning, and instead of throwing me a rope, she decided it was kinder to act like there was no rope at all. She rationalized it like she was protecting me, Like knowing I had failed with an opportunity in hand would have been harder than failing without ever knowing I had a shot. I said, "You didn't think I deserved the choice?" She hesitated, then offered the kind of answer that doesn't sound cruel until you say it out loud. "I didn't think you'd finish." There it was, the quiet judgment that had always been there under her surface encouragement. She believed in the idea of me, but not in the effort it would take for that idea to come true. And somewhere along the way, she decided it was better for me to fail without knowing she'd ever doubted me. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I couldn't stomach another word. Later, I found myself staring at the check again, the paper brittle at the corners, the ink slightly faded, but still sharp enough to be undeniable. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the trust, about how easily people could decide what part of the truth you were allowed to have, about how silence wasn't just absence, it was a decision. I didn't tell Thomas all of what my mother said. I just handed the check back and said, "They didn't believe in me then. That's all you need to know." He looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Not pity, not anger, it was something heavier, a kind of protective grief. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't suggest confronting anyone. He just sat with me in the quiet, finally understanding that everything I had built for myself came not from being lifted, but from clawing my way out of places other people left me in. A few days later, Melanie called me. For the first time since her rooftop Facebook stunt. She didn't start with an apology. Of course not. She asked if I'd been talking to Mom. She sounded nervous, which was unusual for her. I said, "Did you know about the check?" The pause on her end was too long. "I figured," I said, and hung up. There are secrets in every family, things we sweep into corners and pretend don't shape us. But sometimes those secrets grow roots. Sometimes they become the framework for every misunderstanding, every bitter silence, every sideways glance. And when they finally surface, you don't just confront what was hidden, you confront who people really are when you're not in the room to argue your case. And you start to ask yourself questions you're not sure you want the answers to. Like, if they didn't believe in you then, how much of their support now is just guilt wearing a different face? And what happens to love once you realize it came with conditions you never agreed to? When I woke up the morning after Melanie's call, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not exhaustion, not grief. It was clarity, sharp and cold, the kind that settles in your bones after a long night of emotional weather, when you finally realize that the storm isn't passing. It's just part of the landscape now. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window while the coffee brewed, and I thought about how many years I'd spent trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided what I was and what I wasn't. People who measured love by how easy you made their lives, how well you folded into their expectations. I thought about how many times I'd bent myself in half to be the version of me they could support, and how many times they'd vanish the moment I stepped out of that box again. I thought about the graduation, the empty chairs, the camera, the words I had spoken without filter or finesse. To the people who weren't proud, "Don't text me now." At the time, it had felt like fire, like reclaiming something they never thought I'd reach for. But now, days later, weeks even, it felt more like a closing door. Not slammed, just firmly, finally shut. The video hadn't stopped circulating. If anything, it had grown legs. It kept finding new corners of the internet to sneak into. Comments rolled in every day. Some people saw defiance and grit. Others saw bitterness and baggage. I stopped reading them after a while. Not because I didn't care, but because none of them really knew me. None of them knew what it cost to get here, not just in tuition and time, but in self-respect and sleepless nights. None of them knew what it felt like to sit in a room full of people cheering for their support systems, while you clapped for yourself. But someone else did. That week, I got an email from a woman named Jessica Torres. She was a senior partner at a small but growing firm in Chicago. She'd seen the video, seen the aftermath, read the think pieces that tried to pick my life apart like it was some sociology class case study. And instead of shying away from the drama, she leaned in. She said they were looking for someone with fight, someone who didn't wait for permission to speak. She offered me an interview, a real one, no promises, but a chance. I sat with the email open for an hour before I let myself believe it was real. I read it out loud to myself, just to hear the words in the air, just to make sure it wasn't something I'd imagined in a moment of hope-starved delusion. And then I thought about calling someone to tell them, someone who would understand the weight of it, who would say, "I'm proud of you," without agenda or obligation. But there was no one I wanted to call. Thomas had started coming around more. We were rebuilding slowly, cautiously, like people laying bricks where a bridge had once burned. But we weren't there yet. Not enough for him to carry this kind of news. My mother hadn't spoken to me since I confronted her about the check. Melanie had gone silent, probably hoping the whole mess would just sink into the background again like it always did. And so I sat there, holding this victory in my hands, wondering what it means to succeed when the people you always imagined cheering for you are no longer part of the picture. I wondered if success still tastes as sweet when it's eaten alone. Eventually, I said yes to the interview. I booked a flight, I printed out my resume, put together my portfolio, ironed my suit. I did it all like a woman who knew she belonged in the room, even if the people who raised her never said so out loud. I didn't tell anyone, not because it was a secret, but because it was mine. Finally, wholly mine. The night before I left, I got a text from my dad. Just one line. "We should talk." I stared at it for a long time. No context, no apology, no acknowledgement of everything that had unraveled in the past month. Just a vague gesture, like he'd reached the end of his silence and wanted me to do the work of bridging the gap. I didn't reply. The next morning, as I boarded the plane, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that comes with resolution, but the kind that comes when you stop asking for answers from people who've already shown you they don't have them. I nailed the interview. The firm offered me a position, not a symbolic role, not a look at this inspiring story handout, but a real job with real expectations. They didn't want me because I went viral. They wanted me because I spoke like someone who had earned every inch of her authority the hard way. And that's the thing about starting over in your 40s. It doesn't come with parades. There's no swelling soundtrack. No one hands you a certificate saying, "You survived." What you get is the quiet knowledge that you did what others said you couldn't. And if you're lucky, you get to do it on your terms. I never replied to any of the texts that came in after the clip blew up. Not Melanie's weak attempts at reconciliation. Not my mother's sideways check-ins disguised as recipe links. Not my father's single-sentence Hail Mary. Because if they couldn't show up when it mattered, if they couldn't be there when I was still climbing, then they don't get to sit in the front row now that I've found the summit. That might sound harsh. Maybe it is, but here's what I know for sure. Love is shown, not spoken. Pride is presence, not platitudes. And family is who shows up when the room is still quiet, when there's no applause yet, when all you've got is tired eyes and trembling hands. So if you weren't there then, don't text me now.